a modern day entrepreneur is an ancient day king. Truth be told, to go out there in the marketplace and do battle, which is what being an entrepreneur is, on a daily basis.
Welcome to the episode, Paradigm Shift. We're glad that you could join us. And tonight is a very special one, a special episode, because our guest leader, and in his own right, is a dear friend of mine, and that is Rishi Jeeva. As you know, Paradigm Shift aims to bring leaders in their own rights, in their own spaces, so that we can glean off the principles, experiences to shape and sharpen our journey as leaders. So tonight we welcome Rishi Jeeva. As I said, a devout family man, a good friend, and most importantly, a child of God. And tonight's conversation is about your faculty of entrepreneurship in your life, that God has given you the grace. So welcome.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Yeah, Rishi, there was certainly in your journey as a businessman and now an entrepreneur, a defining moment where you realized that you were called to build something bigger than what you started out with in the origins of business days. So talk to us a bit about if there were any defining moments and what shaped that.
Well, I can't actually say that I had a defining moment or, a milestone moment per se. I think for me it was progressive over a period of time. And I say, often if you fly close to the sun, you're going to catch fire.
Yes.
And the sun I refer to is SON, and that's Jesus. So I think along the journey, as my relationship developed with him, I started to realize that there was something more. And it wasn't necessarily as we entrepreneurs often think about bigger, exponential growth. It started to shift more towards significance and building something significant.
Sure. So there's obviously a huge difference between what many of us would think as success when we look at size of business, the gross monthly turnover. So the bigness of stuff, and you're talking about significance, and that is what a characteristic of success is, significance. So many people in that space, and particularly what we're talking about tonight is the differences between entrepreneurship and kingdom entrepreneurship business. But in the perspective of kingdom entrepreneurship, we'll come to that later on as well. Is there a separation between business and faith?
I'm going to touch on a few points. And you mentioned along what you were saying just now, the aspect of success. I think if I can touch on that firstly, how we ought to define success. I think there has to be that clear separation between entrepreneurship and kingdom entrepreneurship. And as a result, to preface that, we need to look at what the true definition of success is. And I think the default setting is bigger, turnover, revenue, asset base, all of those things. But even if we look at that sphere in itself, there's a really good book called Good to Great. And there's a study that's done over a long period of time. And this is a secular book per se, but it deals with the nuts and bolts in the business sphere. And one will be very surprised to see that a lot of the businesses that are deemed to be great, actually a lot of businesses that are not well known to the average person.
Yeah.
So what am I saying? I'm saying the definition of success and even greatness in that sphere actually in itself goes much deeper. But then when we look at success now with a kingdom mentality and mindset, you'll see in a few moments when I elaborate on it that there's a huge chasm between the two. That goes to answer your next question, and that is the aspect of faith and business.
And business, yeah.
Are they mutually exclusive? Can you conduct business without faith, etc.? And yes, if you look at it from a secular point of view, business can be conducted with a set of principles, implementation of natural laws, and there'll be in that sphere a level of success.
Yeah.
But is that the success that we want from a kingdom perspective? And the answer to that is no. So I often say in the typical business context, risk is risk, R-I-S-K.
Yeah.
But when we shift to kingdom mindset and entrepreneurship, we've heard it, risk is spelled F-A-I-T-H.
Right.
And that is sight really without actually seeing. That in its essence is what faith is.
Yeah.
So you can't conduct business, in my opinion, in the realm of kingdom entrepreneurship without faith. And I'd like to just, define more clearly the difference between, for our viewers, entrepreneurship versus kingdom entrepreneurship, because that's something you touched on as well. And again, in the scopex of business, entrepreneurship, if we just apply business principles, which for the most part are acceptable, let's talk about the aspect of quadrants in business.
Right.
So you've got self-employed / employed.
Yeah.
The progression therefrom would be to then move to being a business owner. And then from there you want to move to the next step, which is an investor.
Yes.
Those are seen to be levels of progression. We can apply the same thing to kingdom entrepreneurship, but there's one level that's above an investor, and that level is what I call stewardship.
Right.
And that becomes applicable from a kingdom entrepreneurship point of view. So on the one hand, the how and the why is very different to the how and the why on the other hand, namely respectively entrepreneurship versus kingdom entrepreneurship.
Excellent. So just to go back a bit, implementing and employing universal business principles can give you a level of success. And hard work, disciplined lifestyle, diligent understanding and research in your skill or in your faculty, and employing all of that would generally get you to some measure and level of success. And that's, something that we can measure in terms of assets and material, blessings. But kingdom entrepreneurship is designed differently. In that now you're saying that it employs the aspect of faith, and where normal entrepreneurship or business employs the aspect of risk, we need to have a paradigm shift in this. Do you find that, presently we have a lack of this in the church today, in society today, in terms of business owners and entrepreneurs having a lack of faith, or having a very good measure of risk, and they misinterpret that for faith?
Absolutely. I think definitely, I'd like to break it down a little further. So we've got common elements in both spheres, entrepreneurship and kingdom entrepreneurship. And that is, business is conducted in a natural world, in a natural way.
Yes.
That often requires our natural faculties as well, and senses, if you will.
Yeah.
The acquisition of information is something that you literally physically have to do. You're not necessarily going to, just pray about, a particular market that you want to get into.
Correct.
Yes, you will. But then there's the wisdom aspect to then study it, be diligent, do your research, apply diligence.
Correct.
So the principles exist in both. that can be implemented,
Yeah.
and it'll yield success. Where the issue sometimes gets muddied is when it comes to the kingdom entrepreneurship point of view. Often it's faith without works.
Right.
So we are expectant and there's faith, but there isn't the discipline and the diligence that is required as part of the process being here on earth, which is a natural process as well. So if you leave the one out and implement the other, or vice versa, there is going to be a lack of optimization.
Yeah.
And then there's one step further, and I think this is the most critical thing, and that is the why. The entrepreneur versus the kingdom entrepreneur will have two fundamentally different whys, and that is the sum total and the essence of what we do and why we do it. What am I saying in a nutshell? What's the purpose?
What's the purpose
of your business or businesses, of your entities, your enterprise? What is the purpose of that? And those will differ as far as the East is from the West.
No, 100%. I think, it's a given. We all, we're all in it to make money. But I think when you have that paradigm shift as a kingdom entrepreneur, it's why you want to make money, and you understand your purpose as a kingdom entrepreneur. But I want to zone in on a word you used in terms of faith. And I often do this curveball questions with some of the guests that I have, but I want to draw from what you said in terms of faith as a kingdom entrepreneur, that faith is about sight. And I think it's very key to have that level of sight, but I'd like to call it insight. I think it's an insight that sometimes, just an entrepreneur don't have, the regular entrepreneurs, and having insight. In your journey, what are some of the insights that was very distinct? If you operated, pre-Rishi kingdom entrepreneur, just a businessman, what are some of the insights that you can share, maybe just one or two, you don't have to go into specifics, that gave you the cutting edge or placed you in unfair favor that in business and in investing or acquiring or whatever you did?
So I love the word that you used, insight, because if I looked at myself in a third person, from a third person perspective, quite frankly, Rishi is pretty stupid. and it's not a false humility. I mean, really, I've made lots of mistakes in business through the years that I could have done things in, hindsight's
absolutely
obviously 2020. I could have been wiser about this, and it could have taken a lot less time, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And I realized that stupidity diminished the more I got out the way. So often our default setting is to look at our physical senses. So again, we want to hear with our ears, we want to see with our eyes, we want to acquire information and make decisions from a cerebral point of view, and that's got its place. However, the most profound decisions, I believe, take place when Rishi gets out the way, and that sight is an insight, where your spirit then relies on the Holy Spirit for direction. So it sounds counterintuitive what I'm about to say, and that is, we actually make or have the best outcomes when we don't make the decisions. It's like, what do you mean, Rishi? You don't make the decisions?
Yeah.
And that's just it. I think, when we begin to learn to develop an ear to listen to the instruction and direction of the Holy Spirit and implement His instruction, as you can see, it doesn't really require a decision per se, then we begin to stay on point with His will. And that's a tough thing, because sometimes it's hard to fathom exactly what I call His micro will is in a situation. I believe there's a macro will and there's a micro will.
Very good, yeah.
And the truth is, sometimes we don't know what that micro will is. And over time it pans out. And when we look back, it's like a quilt, when you turn over, you just see a whole lot of what looks to be chaos, all different directions. And when you turn it over, you see the pattern unfold. So that requires faith, to trust, a developed ear. And we can only really get that, not through a decision, but through a relationship with Him. So that insight, if I break it up, when I say insight, and I love the term that you used, is just that. So it's like, for me, the thought process is, the sooner I get out the way, the sooner I lean in and discern what I'm supposed to do, and accurately and timelessly do that, that's where I'm going to yield the best results.
You obviously refuse to, give me some of your, insight into the investments and business, because, if I could say, that's the humility you have, but I know, I've done some research, and you certainly have a multi-million rand enterprise, if not, just to say the least. So, you're in it, you're experienced, you're disciplined. So you're saying to us that in the entrepreneurship of things, according to the universal laws and model, we can thrive and we'll be successful. So thriving. But you're saying that in kingdom entrepreneurship, it's about abiding in the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
So what were some of the biggest, or some of the things that changed you from understanding this perspective, from thriving, and we all started that way. We thrived to become successful. We've employed, and just like you, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but there's obviously a level of Him that we try to utilize, and but in your journey, shifting from thriving to abiding, what was some of the stuff that you knew you had to literally get down to making it non-negotiable?
Again, it comes back to relationship.
Relationship, yeah.
It just all emanates from relationship, and there's that refining process. Because truth be told, to go out there in the marketplace and do battle, which is what being an entrepreneur is, on a daily basis.
So just say that again.
Yeah. So
that's a powerful.
A modern day entrepreneur is an ancient day king. So to go out and to do battle in the marketplace on a daily basis, to come away with victory, number one is you are going to come away with bruises and have your fair share of difficult days. That's a given. So entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted. It really is more than just a decision and a woman a fancy one day that, hey, I want to get up and become an entrepreneur. I think it's something far deeper, and I think to be able to do that, go and do battle, as I put it, in the marketplace, and to do it in a way where you can walk away with your hands clean, and where you can put your head on the pillow and have peace at the end of the day, to know that you are wanting to conduct yourself in a way that's pleasing to God. That desire of the heart takes place out of relationship with God.
Absolutely.
And even that in itself, to have a desire in that way, as Paul even says, it's grace in itself. It's grace in itself.
Absolutely.
Because you're dealing with the marketplace on a daily basis, and it's easy to lose perspective. It's easy to become materialistic, and it's easy to just conform to the way the world does business.
Absolutely.
But when you understand your purpose and the significance you want to achieve through it, then you hold true to what God has called you to do and how He wants you to do it. And it sometimes doesn't make sense in the natural. I term this one of the aspects is a beautiful paradox.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense in the natural, but it's only a matter of time before you see it, that the goal is the things of above that your sights are set on.
Absolutely. And I think that, it's half the truth when we know that, listen, we want to get into business or become an entrepreneur for money, for currency. It's half the truth. And sometimes it's not wise to get into business for that very same sake. Speak to that a little bit. I mean, I know you spoke about purpose. In kingdom entrepreneurship, it's about purpose. So the whys are different in both spectrums. But speak about how can we transition from in business. I came in to make money, but I want to make that transition to become a kingdom entrepreneur. What are some of the ambits and the mandates of a kingdom entrepreneur, and maybe pull out from what you said about the fourth quadrant being steward?
So I think that if one decides that they want to get into business to make money as a means to an end, and it's not destiny related or purpose related, but it's just to make money, as they would possibly get a job somewhere and go into corporate or the independent sector, etc. I think one has to be real and the truth of what their decision is. And that may be okay for that individual if they are being true to the decision, as opposed to under the guise of, hey, I want to be a kingdom financier or a kingdom entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think the rubber will meet the road very, very quickly there. So
be tested.
Absolutely. So if you're not grounded in your profound why, very quickly the testing will happen, and very quickly one will succumb to it. Very quickly. So you've got to know exactly that. There's a call into it. Now here's the tricky part, and that is, I don't actually think that you can decide to do that. It's like behavior. I think that if one decides to have a behavior, a certain level of behavior or decorum, so to speak, I think it's only a matter of time where if the right pressure point is pressed and exerted, what's on the inside comes out. So to reverse engineer the process, it starts with what's the center of it all, and that's Jesus and our relationship with Him. From there, you actually don't have to think about, hey, I want to be a kingdom entrepreneur. It's a natural process that takes place. And I think that's the goal. A group of friends and I were talking about it recently, and we were just talking about the 10 Commandments and the law, and how Jesus whittled it down to just 2, and so on and so forth. And we drew the conclusion and drew to the point of, it's actually not about the behavior per se. It's about focusing on Jesus. And that comes into alignment. And so it is with kingdom entrepreneurship.
Absolutely.
You don't need to be taught, hey, the purpose of this is for significance relative to spreading the gospel, fulfilling mandate. Out of that relationship with Him, it becomes a posture of the heart, and it then becomes a goal of the mind.
Wow. I am, obviously also, been in business, and I've realized that I'm great with startups, but I can't, continue the process. So I'm excellent at, seeing a business opportunity, have the skill, the acumen to start up, and then I get bored. And simply because the level of discipline in my life, and so with a few businesses, that's what happened. That's how I failed to realize that my ill discipline is leading me to, some failed businesses and stuff. So I'm great at startups, but I didn't have the skill or the mentorship on how to offload those startups as soon as, because that's a great entrepreneurship skill. Start up companies, get it sold, and carry on. All right, and hopefully in the near future that could be like what I venture into. But for me, the passion has always been ministry, has been kingdom, and I got stuck in between continuing with the startups and trying to flog it, but my heart was, in kingdom work and kingdom entrepreneurship, and not realizing that that's part of kingdom entrepreneurship, startups, and give it on to sell it up and give it on to others that's coming up. And because I didn't have the discipline, I get bored easily. Now you have the discipline. I mean, you have the habits that developed over the years. You stay vested in most of your companies, most of the enterprises. What were some of the habits and disciplines in sustaining that successes?
I think for me, focus is a pivotal thing. That if I'm goal orientated, I think I'm wired that way. So fortunately, it's a bit of a predisposition more than something that I can pat myself on the back with regard to. And I'm goal orientated, so I will see something through, and again, I have a mindset, fortunately, again, it's grace, where giving up is not an option. I'll see it through, and hard work, from the get-go, has been something that I've been prepared to, go all out in terms of a mindset to fulfill. That if it requires, hours before or hours after,
You're
no
putting
problem.
it in, yeah.
What's required is required to get it done. Obviously, there are seasons to things as well, and the ability to understand seasons. Often people, it's mentioned balance, having balance in life. I do understand the heart of the term balance, but I don't entirely agree with it, because if you think about balance, if you just look at scales, to balance scales, let's call it 50-50, we're looking at percentage. But I think understanding seasons means that there are times where there's going to be imbalance.
Right.
Like a farmer, for example. I don't profess to know much about farming, but I do know that when you're sowing, the time spent, the labor spent, the effort spent is different.
Compared to...
Correct. From having the growth period take place and then obviously harvest time. So similarly, you'd be required at certain seasons to put in that extra elbow grease and shoulder to the grindstone, as it were. Recognizing those times, putting in the sacrifice, and obviously then getting back to make sure that time, which is invaluable, and I think that's a whole different podcast on its own.
Absolutely.
But to make sure that you don't maintain that imbalance, as it were.
Yeah.
It's optimization for that season, and then that's it. Get on to the next part of it.
Excellent. We are facing tremendous difficulties, turmoils. It's been consistent since COVID. A series of, literally every year, a series of just trials and tribulations and uncertainty. It hasn't stopped. For us, KZN was the worst with the COVID, and then the floods, then the looting, not to mention the failing systems, municipalities, and those kind of things. Tough times. Speak to us about enduring tough times as an entrepreneur. And I know that you did mention earlier on that you're gonna get bruised and you're gonna get, how does one, and how have you survived these tough times? And I know that we have the one single answer, and you've been speaking to that. But to maybe somebody that does not, who's listening to this podcast, that does not know the Lord, and is just wanting to get some advice. And we're not giving out advice, and I know that's not your position, but we're speaking to your experience for tough times.
Tough times, I'm an optimist.
Yes, that's
So
definitely
when I hear tough times, I think opportunity. And really, whether there are tough times or times where the economy is thriving, there's always opportunity if you look for opportunity. And I often use the analogy that, if you're looking to purchase a vehicle,
Yes.
a particular vehicle, and you've never noticed that vehicle, but now you are considering this particular brand and series, maybe even a particular color. You notice what happens soon thereafter. You end up seeing these all over the place.
Absolutely.
Hey, that's the vehicle.
Yes, that's true.
That's the color. The reason is because now you're looking with a different lens. So similarly, I think, an entrepreneur looks or has to develop and ought to develop a way to look at things so that you can identify opportunities.
Absolutely.
That's one of the key factors, that understand there are opportunities. And if you understand that there are opportunities, you will then look for those opportunities and identify those opportunities. Secondly, read the room. Read the situation. The ability to adapt is vital, because business is very fluid as well. So you want to make sure that you are not holding on to an idea that has become obsolete 6 months down the line. Bringing something to market, for example, depending on what field it is. So think it through, and think it through on an ongoing basis. The other mistake that I've often made through the years, and that is waiting for the perfect time.
There's never
a perfect time. The refining actually takes place through the process.
right.
But get started, get going.
Yeah.
And I'm the first one looking in the mirror to say that to myself, because I have delayed on things through the years, in hindsight, waiting for it to be optimal and perfect timing.
Yeah.
And now through experience, I look back and I can see, it wasn't necessary. So I approach things differently now, get go a lot quicker, a lot faster, bring something to market a lot quicker, look at an idea. It brings me to another thought, and that is that often as well, on a subliminal, subconscious level, a person may not open that door because they're afraid that what could actually be there is a no.
We're afraid of the no's.
Afraid
Rejection.
of the no's. That what happens if I take it to market and it fails? So there's this, self-sabotage that takes place, and there's this procrastination that takes place. And I think if we just took the approach, here's an idea, let me take it to market. If it bombs out, it bombs out. You know what? That may not be the successful stone, but it could be the step that leads you to the successful point that you land on.
Absolutely.
But it's part of the journey, it's part of the process. And we often think about learning from successes, but I can argue, quite frankly, that we learn more from the mistakes.
And that's a paradigm shift right there. Tough times, look for opportunities. And that's just such great, leadership advice or, mantra that we could look at. What are some of the things that we shouldn't do? And I know we spoke about some of your habits and disciplines, but what are some of the things that we should not do from your experience over the years?
I think, sometimes we can circumvent something that potentially could be successful with preconceived ideas and notions. The other important thing is we also assess the potential success of something from our perspective without market research. And even if we had to go through lots of examples in business where, I mean, literally, that's why case studies are important and market research is important. And, we live in the age of technology, which is wonderful that we can test things before mass production and manufacturing and so on, just to test what the behavior of the consumer is. And we may be, hypothetically, if we are manufacturing pens, and we may think, I use a black pen every day, and so I think black pens are going to sell really well. But that's from my perspective.
Yeah.
And we'll be surprised to learn that when you do your market research and you put out a black pen, a green pen, a red pen, a blue pen, suddenly you realize, hey, you know what? Black pen's actually not on the top of the list in terms of demand. Right. It's actually blue or red. So rather than go and now produce 1 million black pens, from your perspective or my perspective, we've done market research, put the preconceived ideas and notions aside, look at what the market tells us, and then go with that. Absolutely. And now we produce accordingly in terms of demand. So perspective from an individual basis, be wary of that. I also believe that, I'm sure many that may be listening to this, in the sphere of business would have heard, if you are the smartest in the room, you're in the wrong room. The Bible says there's wisdom in the multitude of counsel. So I think a visionary, which is one of the characteristics of an entrepreneur, is to always have a mindset to welcome ideas. Because ideas are not confined to a particular background, a particular upbringing, a geographical location. None of those things. Yeah. They originate in the mind. And we know the mind is just so incredible that an idea that is an incredible idea can come from anywhere and any direction. So if you have this teachable approach, this welcoming approach, a not know-it-all approach, I think we'll be very surprised at the wonderful input that we could have from those that maybe, previously we didn't think could contribute a lot of value to. Yeah. So just have that approach. Absolutely. Which is humility in business, really.
Yeah. And I think that is very, very important to maintain, wise counsel. The world obviously says certain things, and I like what you said, if you're the smartest in the room, you're in the wrong room. The kingdom entrepreneurship says there's wise counsel in the multitude of elders and many, building strong relationships that's rooted in Christ. It's good to be a part of certain societies and business forums, but having like-minded individuals certainly can adjust and add to your success and purpose. Is it important? Are there structures in Durban? Is it something that we need to look at in terms of gathering kingdom entrepreneurs, and is there a space that we need to talk to in that? Do we have a lack of it? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Firstly, I would say there's a lack of it.
Okay.
Secondly, I think it's critical, absolutely imperative, because I think also there are times where your flame may be, for whatever reason, just
diminished
and because you go through seasons that way.
Absolutely.
It could be fatigue, it could be creativity, seasons of where there's lack of creativity. It could be dealing with a multitude of problems in that, because you're going to do that. I mean, as long as we're on earth, we're going to be dealing with problems. So your flame's not necessarily going to be at its brightest and its biggest, and that's where you need to have the right people around you at those moments,
right,
to bring their flame along as well. So that's important. I think also from a practical point of view, we need to discuss these things. We need to for want of a better term, debate these things, get down to the nitty-gritty of it, see what works, what doesn't work, where there's synergy, where there's collaboration.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely imperative. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron,
Yeah.
so does a man sharpen a man. And to qualify that statement, man sharpen a man, it doesn't necessarily mean the gender of a man
Correct.
only, because it
Yeah.
means woman as well.
Yeah.
So I think that principle is key. And if we have that in the area of entrepreneurship and business, definitely the gathering of individuals is an imperative.
It's necessary.
Yeah, currently we have one in the central Durban area in Morningside, and I know we've got one here, which you are heading up at Trinity Family Church here on the south, and we're looking at doing something soon in the north. So the idea there is just to have men come together, sharpen each other, discuss ideas. And we're going to be going further down the line to have other things come out of it at other sessions where we can discuss these things in a lot more detail.
Yeah.
And just be a sounding board there, as well as a point of information as well in wherever we can impart. We are happy to do so.
No, absolutely. I think it's about, legacy speaks to that, leaving something behind in the next generation. Making sure we capture them and give them that zeal to shift their minds, because I think the systems of this age and this world are training our kids and the next generation to think about business very differently. They somehow want that instantaneous success, and I like what you're saying, because you commenced with abiding and a life in the spirit, discernment, but you also attached the research, market research, being astute as an individual to make sure that you know your space and understand that space, and you collaborate that. And that is very important, because often enough we want to also pray about certain things, which we should do, but others require business sense and common sense. And so when the Holy Spirit fuels that, you become formidable. In closing, a few key takeaways, and definitely we want to get you back. We literally we generalized many of the stuff here, but you're a reservoir of business wealth and information and wisdom. So we certainly want to get you back soon and hopefully talk about something specific. And I know you're also launching a podcast soon, so we're going to look out for that and also advertise that. But I know that if anybody's looking for a vehicle, they should Google Rishi Jeeva without giving all of your stuff away, and other businesses. What are some of just a few key takeaways just to leave as we close?
Firstly, I think it's a fallacy, a myth, to compare. And I think often it's a major problem. And quite frankly, I believe it to be the tool of the enemy, to separate success one as opposed to the other by means of comparison.
Right.
Bigger isn't necessarily better. In economic terms, we know the law of diminishing returns, and therefore bigger isn't necessarily bigger.
Exactly.
Bigger isn't necessarily better. I think it's about you understanding your individual journey and what that means. The other thing is, don't be hard on yourself, because there's a lot more involved in what we call success that is beyond an individual's beyond their capability, if you will, or beyond their control. That's the word I was actually looking for, beyond their control. And that's circumstance. For example, in the US, there's a very well-known individual in the business field who's now, in his latter years, and has been really successful in identifying businesses and capex, putting money into certain businesses that have grown, exponentially and have really outperformed other businesses on stock exchanges, on the New York Stock Exchange, in the various stock exchanges, etc. But when you get down to a conversation with the individual, a lot of it is also not to discredit the individual by any means whatsoever. But for example, if that individual who featured in the Forbes top 10 list of the last 20 years, for probably most of those years, and was most wealthiest in the world, arguably at least 5 of those years. But that person's mum had naturally a very, very good handle on numbers innately as a predisposition. And he was born with that ability to work with numbers very well. And then ended up at a university where his lecturer, the lecturer that was there, was excellent, absolutely excellent, and arguably one of, in the field, one of the most well-known individuals when it comes to stock, identifying stock and how the stock market works, and shares and businesses and the strategy behind all of that, with well-written books as well, and had that opportunity to interact and interface. And that provided his grounding. Now you take that individual and put them in the 1800s in Africa, you're going to get a very different outcome.
Absolutely.
So circumstances do play a difference. And by all means, with due respect, I don't want to, I'm not discrediting that individual's success in that field, but what I'm saying is, by his own admission, there's a whole lot more
at play.
Exactly. So success is about you finding your purpose and fulfilling that. The next thing is, practically speaking, it's critical to have a great team around you. The term is used loosely as staff.
True.
And I don't even like to use that word staff, because if you find the right people, they actually become like extended family that lock into the vision. And that's arguably the toughest thing to do, is to identify those individuals. Very difficult, but when you do, it's wonderful to have them.
Absolutely.
And I coined a phrase many years ago that great people have great people. Only to say that the initial great people part is actually not really great people. The emphasis is on the other great people that make them look great to fulfill vision. So really, it's about your people, your team, and you got to have them close to you. That's reality.
Absolutely.
You've got to have them close to you. They are like extended family. And then the third thing, don't sweat the small stuff.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
In the early days, you sweat the small stuff. Get over it, dust your hands, move on, and move forward. So don't sweat the small stuff is what I would say. And then finally, and we go back to one of the things you've mentioned at the beginning, is how we spell risk as a kingdom entrepreneur. F-A-I-T-H. That really, if he's called you to it, he'll call you through it.
Excellent.
What you build, you got to sustain.
100%.
What he builds,
he will sustain.
He will sustain.
Excellent.
And maybe it's for another podcast to elaborate on that. And that is, the aspect of stewardship.
Yes.
In other words, all that is being built through you as a conduit doesn't belong to you. It belongs to him. And that we leave for another podcast.
No, excellent. And so I deliberately meandered away from talking about stewardship because I wanted to take that advantage to get you back. And so thank you, Rishi, for spending your time with us. And there you have it, from an astute entrepreneur a very resilient man of faith, we end this podcast. And you heard us talking about some of those forums that we do have in Musgrave and on the Bluff area. If you are certainly interested, just send us a comment on any of the social media platforms that you're watching this video from and this podcast, and we will get you that information. So right here, you heard it from Rishi Jeeva, Leadership in Business. What's the difference between entrepreneurship and kingdom entrepreneurship? And thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mal.
Excellent. Great stuff.